Think and Link. We do this once a month, typically on a Thursday, and we have both a virtual environment and a real in real life environment, right? Where you're all sitting. And it's a great little event every month. We have some amazing speakers coming up that you'll see come out. We've booked those already, which is great. We have Moira and Tom today. We're going to be talking about the future of food. But before we get to that, I want to make sure I mention our most appreciated sponsors. First being REM5. They created that virtual environment. We can't call it the metaverse because somebody else uses that or abuses that, you might say. We're calling it a digital virtual environment. You can hang out, chat, connect with people. REM5 is amazing. Check them out. Lake One, which is anything HubSpot. If you've heard of HubSpot, if you want to know more about it, check with Lake One. They're amazing. And then, of course, RSP, because we're in their space. It's a showcase of their design talents as a firm, a global, international even firm, working in a whole bunch of fields. Definitely worth checking out. And then, of course, last but not least important, Capsule. We put this on, honestly, we put this on selfishly because we want to learn. You're just kind of extras. We're just very curious people, and we want to learn from our community. And in these two particular individuals, Moira, I have digitally stalked for about a decade, not in the restraining order kind of way, just inside that. Admired her work way back when she was at Hershey. And Tom, I just got to know at a big trade show and fell immediately in love with what he's doing and what that venture is. So I knew I had to get them on the stage, mainly again, for me to learn. And hopefully you can enjoy it as well. And can connect with some friends and guests. So I'm gonna start this off, have Moira first, and then Tom, tell us a little bit about your background, what you're doing right now, introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, great, thank you. I like to learn too, so this should be great. And excuse my voice, it may be a little rough. I was in Ireland last week and maybe too much karaoke in the pub, so I think we'll be good, but it's a little rough. So, so my career has taken a really interesting, wonderful path. I believe from the start that design is transformative, and it transforms people and brands and products and organizations, and it absolutely transformed me from a very shy, rather remote little girl who was really kind of only comfortable communicating, speaking through dance and form, shape, composition, story, design elements. And then after early period of kind of creative destruction, I found a path and forged a path in design. And so a series of really interesting opportunities. So first I was the creative director and only American employee for a Japanese fashion retailer, a kind of Uniqlo before Uniqlo. And then was hired by Colin Forbes into Pentagram, into their New York office, which was an amazing masterclass working on his team in corporate identity, which it was called at the time. And during that time, I started writing for design magazines, and I taught the thesis class at the graduate program of Pratt, and working with the AIGA, developing conferences, the first two business conferences, AIGA programs, exhibitions, and so on. And then I was called out to LA to be the chair of design and illustration at the Otis College of Art and Design, which is really interesting. The school had moved from its downtown MacArthur Park location out by the ocean, by the airport, just up the hill from Electronic Arts and all of the new buzz of new design, new business that was happening then. And really there, I kind of helped to build a curriculum for 21st century design for careers that really didn't exist then. We didn't know what they would be. They are here now. And then from there, I was asked to join Hallmark. So that was really my step into the corporate world. And it was really interesting and very, fascinating to just culturally. There, my charge was really to help them build a design culture. And in the process, I saw an opportunity. I asked who's working on the brand. From a design perspective, they thought, well, everybody knows our logo. What do you mean? So I was able to develop an in-house design group that wasn't working on the product, like cards or gifts, but actually helped bring design into their identity, their internal marketing, and company culture. And from there, I was then invited to join Coca-Cola. So I moved to Atlanta and was immediately upon arriving kind of charged with the challenge of developing a visual identity for brand Coke. I was the director for design in North America, which is the largest market. Coke is the lead brand, obviously. And so this was just an amazing journey. I brought in Turner Duckworth, and the work ultimately won the first ever design award, the Grand Prix Award at Cannes. It was the first year in 2008 that design was included in the Cannes Festival. And it was very significant in terms of its impact, not only in the culture, but in the corporate culture as well. And there I was asked to join Hershey. And again, it was kind of globalizing their iconic brands, no small feat, and building again a design culture, design awareness. And from there, I moved on to PepsiCo. Mauro Puccini had started the design initiative there, and I was then the VP of design for global beverage, which was, kind of vast portfolio of still and sparkling beverages and teas and so on. And again, the opportunity to build design, a design culture and awareness, and also to kind of build design experience beyond just the product. And then from there, I went on to Method and Ecovair, out of the category of beverages and food, but an amazing entrepreneurial startup that changed the whole aisle in cleaning, as you know. And there they had been acquired by SC Johnson. So the charge was to really help build a team that could handle more than a brand, more than just one brand, multi-brand experience and so on. And then for the past several years, I've been the operational advisor on design for ReThink Food, which is a really interesting purpose-driven venture group that is, invest in early startup companies that in an effort to really deal with the transformation of legacy food systems and so on. So ingredient tech, low, no waste technology, sustainable distribution, packaging, and so on. So very interesting group.
Yeah, you can kind of get the idea why I've obsessed over Moira for a long time. She's touched some of the most iconic brands in the world, which is kind of amazing, and had impact, significant impact. And the fact that you were at Coke and Pepsi, I didn't put this question, but I think there's something in that about what was the difference? But we'll get to that later. Tom, we want to get to your background and what you're currently doing.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here. I'm calling from the east of England right now, so if it looks like it's gone dark by the end of the meeting, it probably has actually gone dark. Might have to turn the lights up. Yeah, so great to be here. I've got a much less storied career to date than Moira, so maybe I won't have as many names, but I can talk about one main name that is what the company I'm working on right now. So, but I mean, maybe before that, my background was academia. I was always planned to be a professor. That was the big goal before I started the company, and that was a goal up until about 6 months before starting the company. That was still the intention. So it was a fairly conventional academic career until that point. I was PhD up in Scotland, and as a postdoc and a fellow in Cambridge in the biochemistry department, and ultimately that's where I started the company from. And the company is then, of course, that's the main event for what I want to talk to you about is it's called the Supplant Company. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
You hear me okay?
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Okay,
Keep it up.
Maybe I'll just turn the volume down or something. Yeah, so the Supplant Company is the company. What we do is we're a food ingredient company, or broadly an ingredient company. The big vision is to enable better for people, better for planet, or enable healthier and climate friendly for the first time across all consumer categories, really. We think this is sort of table stakes branding for most new brands nowadays, and legacy brands all trying to move somewhat in this direction as well. And yet there's some big major hurdles to stopping products from being genuinely healthier and genuinely better for the planet, as opposed to not genuine. And one of the main things that stops the products doing that is bulk ingredients. So the things that constitute the bulk of products. So, less so flavors and fragrances and colors and essence, but the bulk things that constitute the bulk of most consumer goods. And so sugar in food is sort of where we started. It's like a really great case. It's, obviously one of the major health issues around the world. It's the #1 source of biodiversity loss globally. And I don't know how much everyone knows about food science, but it can be half the weight of a cookie, for example, can just be pure sugar. So it's a great example, but the premise holds across the board. So that gives us quite a broad remit of things that we can do in a quite a range of different consumer products. The connecting piece that enables us to do this in a way that no one else has done it before is we always use agricultural side streams for everything we do. So things like corn cobs, oat hulls, wheat straw, rice straw, even sugarcane stalks we can use. The majority of what's grown on farms all around the world is actually not what farmers or even consumers tend to think of as the product of the crop, like the grain and the bean and the seeds, etc. That's at best that's about 1/3 of the biomass that's grown on a farm every year. It's about 2/3 are these structural parts of plants, stems and stalks and cobs and husks and hulls, and by and large wasted or at least underutilized, and so in many cases really just causing environmental issues of their own, but at the very least just an unutilized resource that basically isn't really used right now. And so all we do is we build a platform of science that enables to build a platform of ingredients from agriculture's biggest waste source, most abundant raw material. And so that's what we do. The first ingredient is an ingredient to replace sugar in the food system. We call it sugars from fiber. We launched with Chef Thomas Keller about two years ago now. So at one point we were on the menu of his triple Michelin star restaurants, Per Se in New York, French Laundry in California. That was the sort of the first state. Now just this year really started entering mainstream retailers and a few food service outlets. Maybe I will leave it there and happy for you to take over.
Yeah, that's great. There's a whole bunch to discuss, especially as it relates to food systems, and we're going to get into things around scale and how do we scale food systems and all kinds of other stuff. But first, I want to have each of you, and maybe Tom, you go first on this one. What is something that we're perhaps not seeing as average consumers of food, and that's perhaps broken in the system, or that will surprise us that's going out of the system, or is challenging, I guess, is the way I put this. Tom.
Yeah, I'll do the naughty thing. I'm going to frame everything in terms of the company and what our mission is. But of course, that's what the mission is built around what we see the problems with the food system as being. So this is a genuine answer to the question. The premise underlying a lot of the way we approach things is, we want to, when we make solutions to problems in the food system, we want them to be genuine, authentic, real solutions, not things that aren't causing other problems in and of themselves. So the big problem we often see with ways to improve the food system is that the way most or many companies, governments, NGOs approach problems in the food system is by trying to sort of separate out the problem into one of a few buckets. And so typically the typical buckets we see people do this in is health, nutrition, or climate, sustainability, or food security, of course, is a big issue for NGOs and governments. And then so to try and break the problem down into its constituent parts and then try and address those parts. And the challenge or the difficulty of that is that it inevitably leads often to compromises being formed. So for example, innovations that make healthier food, but healthier food for very small numbers of people because there's a net reduction in the efficiency of farming, for example, or production of more food, but it is great in some ways. But if you produce more and it's more junk food, then in some ways that's good, but in many ways that's not so great. And so we try and approach the problem by not breaking down and thinking of just health or sustainability or food security on its own, but rather really trying to think of the system, or recognize that the food system is a system. It's all, these things are all connected, and you really want to think of these things coherently together as you move forward. And so that's the thesis underlying our approach to doing this. We want to be we don't want to make steps forward that people can legitimately point out, I don't see that as a positive step forward, because the compromise you've made is, I don't like that compromise. Rather, if we can make steps forward on all fronts, or at the very least neutral, not stepping back on some fronts, that's really the way we want to approach these things. And of course, that's sort of the premise of what we've done, and so that's what we think we can do with our approach is if we're economically successful, then inherently we will create healthier food. It will be a more sustainable way of producing food, and actually we can produce more food from the same acreage of lands than if you weren't to use that. And so there's these things are all locked together. So I appreciate it's a non-trivial challenge to put to the world to do, because it's quite hard to find ways of doing that, admittedly. But I really think that is a necessary way of thinking about addressing something as complex as the food system.
It was a bit of a softball question for you, because it's kind of the center of what you're doing, but still, we wanted to make sure we talk about it. Moira, what do you think about that? What is something we're not seeing as a challenge?
Yeah, I think because food is so critical, I think, and to some extent people know this, but and all of the good work of new ingredients, new product, new opportunity, I think there's always there's so many new things, both better for you and not. What is the trust to try, and for people to really be able to be aware of these new options and then be able to trust them. But I think it was just really interesting. I don't know if, Tom, you may have seen this, but there was the New York Times published, I think just this week or just recently, there's a study out of Oxford where they looked at, I believe it's 55,000 people in the UK, both vegan, vegetarian, meat and fish eaters and so on, and kind of studied and found out the result is that they maintain that vegans consume 75% less, emissions than others. So we know some of those facts, but in little ways. So one of the examples that they said, because actually the food, commercial food takes as much as 30% of heat generating emissions and so on. So it has a huge impact on the planet and the world. But they likened this one series that in the UK, if everyone in the UK, and Tom, I think the number is like 67, 68 million people, I think somewhat around there in the UK, and they have largely a kind of meat diet, for them to make a shift daily and choose, rather than 3.5 ounce meat, but perhaps 1.7 ounce of meat, which I guess is about the size of a single McDonald's patty, that the impact of that was the equivalent of taking as much as 8 million cars off the road. So that's, it's interesting, like how do we, so there's simple things that we can do, and it's not going to solve the problem completely. And of course there are the impact of processing even better for you food. But I think the food piece in this whole challenge that civilization is facing is so important. And I think, the efforts that Tom and others are doing are so significant. But I think for people to really appreciate that impact and then be able to get the access and awareness to these better options, because there's such a deluge of new products every day, every year, right in the market. And so how do we really make sure people understand what these new things are? And design, I think, factors really big in that, because how does design with codes and cues or whatnot that can kind of present this idea in the form of a product with certain ingredients in a way that consumers can, in the milliseconds that they make decisions, appreciate and then make that choice that will lead them in a better way. So I think it's just a hugely fascinating, important challenges. And I love the pairing, of design and science, because I think I came across this really interesting thing that I don't know if you would agree, Tom, but that science analyzes the existing world to create new knowledge, and design uses existing knowledge to create a new world. So I think they're both, we need each other, and how that happens and when it happens is interesting to talk about. But I think I love the fact that it's really we so need each other in terms of making, you know, successful outcomes, I think, that are needed.
Yeah, I think the communication piece is obviously, yeah, it's obviously super, super key to do any of these things. And we've gone through a whole load of experiences, you know, from our end, trying to work out how to describe what we've got. And of course, you need to describe in a technically accurate way. It needs to be, you know, fit within whatever you know, packaging style. It needs to be understandable by consumers. It needs to be compelling. It's quite hard, and yeah, and candidly, we know we're not quite at the end of the road on that. And then secondly is what sort of a team can then go and deliver on that. You know, obviously the genesis of the company and myself and you know, many of the other management and the broader team are scientifically, that's their background. And so working out the right type of team and organization to go and deliver on that challenge of communicating all that stuff in the right way has been a non-trivial challenge that we've gone through. And as I say, it's still a work in progress.
So I'm going to make a plug. I hope Tom doesn't mind, but I actually ordered his product because I was so curious, right? So this is your talk, but you'll talk more about it. But in terms of the language, what I was so taken by in the back, you know, as you talk about, you know, using sugar from fiber, and it's a new category, but it's made from the upcycled plant fiber using the forgotten half of the forest. And I just think that language is so powerful because as I read this as a human, as a purchaser, you know, I want that those forgotten part of the harvest, you know, I want to take care of it. You know, you feel you engage with that. And I think it's a really beautiful way to kind of crystallize some of what is much more technical and much more, you know, discreet, but in a way that is very empathetic and beautiful. So I loved how you did that. So I just wanted, and it's delicious, by the way.
Thank you. No,
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, that's the sort of stuff I think that we have made substantial progress on in over the last, let's say, 12, 24 months or so, is trying to work out those ways of yeah. And so the forgotten half of the harvest is one of them. Yeah, there's a few little, you know, one-liners that we have, and I'd say, like, yeah, you know, the progress we've made has been working out those, you know, the stepping stones that we can start telling the story. And I think you know, the next steps for the brand are going to be, you know, building an actual brand identity on top of that. I think the foundations are there, and I think and you know, we've had in the early days, I know we've brought agencies in, you know, maybe 2 years ago, and I think it was quite hard. It was a tough ask for some of the agencies to because we hadn't even worked out yet how to describe this quite. It's sort of simple ideas in some ways if you can get them across, but it's a lot of complexity underneath it. And asking an agency to wade through all that detail and build something was quite tough. So I appreciate you noticed that.
Just so you're aware, Tom, that's what we do. So, you know, at any given point in time, you can call us. I forgot to say that when we did the pre-call, and you mentioned that, and I regret it at the moment. That was, I love that line, and Moira, that you pointed that out, that the forgotten parts. Yeah, and it kind of makes you feel sad for those stalks and leftovers. Like, why are we not using them? How come they get left behind? It was very elegant. Now the more challenging question of scale and a food system that has to essentially feed billions of people. How do we address scale and a system that can both feed people and be good for the planet? Where does that start? And Tom, you got the easy one, so you get to also take the first hard one.
And I'm going to take the easy way out and give you the same answer again. No, I mean, yeah, the answer for us is, as I say, that's the way we try and approach these things in the first place, is to say, we want to, yeah, we don't want to compromise between in the case of what you're saying there, health and food security. So, you know, feeding individuals well without feeding everyone sufficiently also, where possible. And yeah, it's I think fair to say quite a few companies that are in the sort of new ingredient world that's been appearing over the last decade or so, would sort of aspire to those to that sort of thing as well. Trying to be healthy, trying to produce new ingredients in different ways. It's obviously technically non-trivial thing to do, but yes, as I say, in the case of what we're doing, we live in this sort of strange world that the forgotten half of the harvest. Who left these stalks out? It's there's a lot of it around, there's a lot of scope to make a lot more food out of the food system. The paradigm shift is to recognize that as food. Now, of course, eating a stalk doesn't sound so appealing. However, stalks and cobs, they are almost entirely fiber, and fiber is the single macronutrient that almost everyone doesn't eat enough of. We eat enough of the rest of the stuff, the starches and the sugars and the fats and the proteins. Even people eat more than enough of these things, and the one macronutrient we don't get enough of is fiber. It's actually the most grown thing on plants. We just selectively throw away the stuff we don't get enough of, and then we have health problems from not eating enough of it. So very, very strange sort of malady the food system has ended up in, and that's probably the way that answers your question in terms of what we do. It's recognizing somehow it's got something very strange with the way we grow food, and bringing the fiber in enables us to address mass consumption and do so healthily. And then, is there anything broadly about scaling? Yeah, there's all companies in this space have to scale. You can't be that successful as a food company without being serving a lot of food. Yeah.
That's great. It's definitely ironic that we throw away the pieces that have that health benefit for us.
Yeah.
That's rather fascinating. And I don't know if you know this, but I'd be curious about the history of why did we get to this point of harvesting not all of the plant? And if you don't know, that's okay, but it's just such an odd thing, right?
Well, I think it's the human body has developed eating crops, and it probably fair to say we wouldn't eat the stalk but we would eat whole grain. We'd eat grains as they were fully intact, and the food system has developed to refine away, and typically the things for refining away is fiber. So humans like the taste of things that are high in fat and high in carbs and high in sugar especially. And so over the generations, we've learned that if we can refine out everything else, then you can get products that taste better and have some various other qualities, but primarily taste better. And the downside is you don't have enough fiber. So yeah, it's really that. I think it's probably fair to say that in the wild we probably wouldn't eat the stalks because they'd just be too tough for us to consume. But that's more of a sort of structural thing. Actually, from a compositional standpoint, you really can bring that in as fiber. But yeah, that's the history. The history of refining out the fiber and refining out the vitamins, and keeping in the sugar and the starch and the fat.
Right. So it's just the stuff we liked more. So we're just
Sure,
monkeys. Yeah. We're just apes walking around, getting the easiest route to food still to this day.
I think it's sugar and fat is almost all the products that people like, from whether it's a potato chip or a ice cream or a chocolate bar. It's basically all sugar or carbs and fat. So that's sort of, it's fairly consistent across categories.
Yeah. Moira, the same question, this scale issue. How do we still scale but deliver healthy for the people and healthy for the planet foods?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really challenging idea when you think about it. So all the legacy brands that I've worked for, the Hershey, the Coca-Cola, PepsiCo in the food world, all were small once. They were the startups of their day, and very ingredients. So the tonics and the ingredients which I'm sure were quite raw initially, with the syrups for Coca-Cola and Pepsi's version, chocolate and so on. So, and then they scaled and scaled and scaled and scaled, and to meet needs. And in the process of doing so, just like corporations and the industrial age mindset that they were founded in, the thrill of efficiency, you know, eliminating waste and streamlining and so on. So you ended up with just the best parts of everything, right? But that scale, and I think as a designer, you know, working in other ways, certainly on the agency side and so on, wasn't until I really entered that world of the corporate world where you really can appreciate the pressure, certainly in public companies, for scale every quarter to demonstrate and lap, you know, your past performance and so on. So on that level alone, the pressure, which is kind of built into the capitalism, you know, kind of model, is so big and palpable. And but I think ultimately, you know, for so many reasons, and there's, you know, talk too, there's a point where there's almost like, rather than growth, there's degrowth that we really at some point have to maybe confront. But obviously there's the need and the growing population and the equal distribution of quality food and sustenance, not just in pockets of you know, kind of desirable pockets or people for everywhere. I think it's a really challenging problem to is bigger, you know, this idea that bigger is always better. How do we make a balance and scale? And so I just think the civilization, this is a challenge that we have to come to terms with. And I have no answer, but I think the food system obviously is a key example of it. And how do you scale and still retain the quality, you know, the kind of integral pieces of your initial vision? Their scale calls for some compromise and sacrifice, I think, seems to be the case. So how do we maintain the best of, and do we have to get bigger always? Are there other ways to supply rather than just growth in the way that we know it? But it's like blows your, you know, it's like, I don't know the answer, but it's the kind of part of the reality, I think, to really think about.
Yeah, design definitely plays a role of that thinking, designing better from the beginning, designing for each of those, considering them from the beginning, which we probably didn't do as much of that way back when, right? It was designed for feeding people, not necessarily thinking about the planet as much. Now it's something that's more present for us, you might say. The next question for you, Moira, to start, this idea of designing a culture, and you've had the chance to be in a lot of different design cultures, and in particular, you've been with Mauro Puccini, who's been on our stage, and maybe David Butler at Coca-Cola. So I'm curious, any comparisons there, and just in general, what have you seen in the designing a design-driven culture?
Right. So I think, you know, the periods that I was in with these companies, over time, and they're still in some ways early days of establishing design's value to a brand, other than a label, right, or a package. And that's a huge awareness to build. And it's very daunting, because here's where you can really appreciate, as a designer, you kind of the classic left brain, right brain, right? You kind of understand those differences, and you come into these companies where there's a dominance of, you know, they're engineered for precision and everything is playbooks and so on, and they're going down the linear decision tree. And so for someone like myself, and designers aren't the only one that think this way, but the idea of a more divergent generative thinking style is very foreign and very disruptive, not always in a good way, because they're working on efficiency and moving through down the line, and kind of the observations and insights that design might raise somehow seem inconvenient often. And it often, sometimes it would feel like war. And it's not war, but if you think about the metaphor of business as war, and the language that shapes behavior, where, you know, you launch a product and strategy and consumers are targets you aim at and hope to hit, and, you know, armloads of bullet points and PowerPoint, it can feel very, very daunting for individuals, for a team, to counter that dominance of this kind of left brain thinking. So I I've been really inspired. There's Dr. Ian Gilchrist, who's written this book, Master and His Emissary, and he's a psychiatrist and with Oxford connection, and he's really studied the impact, other than just the superficial left-right differences of thinking style, but that really that has such impact on attentional preference for, on the left side, a very purposely focused and narrow and segmented kind of vision of the world, versus design, which is more holistic and context and metaphor and seeing the connections between the part and the whole and so on. And so this left, right brain, hemispheres, it's not that we do different things as much as we do things differently. And actually neurologically, there's different ways that people experience the world. So my marketing and business colleagues are truly, and you realize they're really seeing the world differently than designers and those of us on my team and so on. So you realize, but then the dominance, you feel, okay, how can we make a difference? And in the war metaphor and the need for power, I realized very early on that I would never have the largest team or the biggest budget or the broadest shoulders or the loudest voice, to command people change. And design is a necessary change, and this kind of thinking is important. So I started to then explore the idea of power. I really needed to learn what that was. And as a doctor's daughter, I often likened it almost a malpractice, that here I was in these roles to advance design. And if I didn't have the power to do that, that would be just, almost the worst thing. So I had to overcome whatever personal kind of limitations and also understanding different kind of power. And I got to this notion of soft power, which is really about attraction rather than coercion and so on. And it's drawing people. We could never, my team and I, we could never force our colleagues to do what we wanted, i.e. this recommended design, this approach, but we could attract or invite them to want what we did. And that is the power, I think, and it's a legitimate power. So it became my covert kind of mindset that legitimized, especially in today's world, in the war metaphor. War has changed. It's no longer a case where if you have the biggest army or so on, that you're guaranteed to win. We've got outliers and rogue actors, and even some consumer who has a bad experience with your product can dash off a rant, online and if not really, destroy your brand. So it's a different kind of war, and this kind of power, which is the phrase coined by Joseph Nye, it's a legitimate force. And so how can that be operative in this new business world? And this power of attraction, I think, is so powerful. So I worked on that ability to kind of attract people through the power of visualization, prototypes, all other ways or demonstrable ways where we can start to prove and show and attract people to the change that design was making, and draw, out of influence based on trust and respect. So it was a new way to approach it. It validated that approach to me, because again, if you're in this battle as the brand leader, brand general, and this design person comes up and you just think they're going to decorate your uniform, what good are you, right? But if they really can start to see that there is a valid power, especially in today's marketplace, for this complementary thinking, it starts to shift, and the power dynamic is really interesting. So I've worked a lot on that and trying to really build that awareness and the validation for design team.
Decorate your uniform. Did I hear you say that?
Yeah.
Design it with better camo, which wow, that was good. Interesting. Tom, how about the design of the Supplant culture?
The design of the Supplant culture. Yeah, I mean, I think so the company is 6 years old now, so we've done a lot of thinking about culture, but it's definitely definitely still things we're working on, and it'll look different, no doubt, now compared to when we're the size of Pepsi, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think obviously a lot of the things that I think we try and encourage in the company, and maybe I don't know if this is going to diverge a bit away from design, but but just general company culture. You know, a lot of the stuff is you know, standard stuff you might find in books on the topic. You know, we want people who take ownership over the problem, of over problems. You know, people need to be accountable, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think sort of something that aligns with what Moira was saying is I actually know the book, that Ian McGilchrist's book. I can't say I've read the whole thing through and through, but I've got it, and I feel like I get the basis of it. But I definitely appreciate the recognition of, yeah, you know, people seeing things in different ways, looking at the same problem in different ways, the left and the right hand brain. And I suppose the stereotype of the scientist would be the left hand brain. I think the sort of facts, everything has to fall into one place, and you know, that obviously has its place, but obviously when you run in a company, you are spinning many plates in one go, and you need to be able to tolerate ambiguity a lot. And you know, we really appreciate the people that do well in the company are often the people who can do that, who can handle many things, who can understand more than just their siloed view of what they're doing, and can you know, connect the dots between things that other people might not see. And the people who find it harder tend to be more often and more narrow in perspective. And so even the forgotten half of the harvest, you know, that's a product of the fact that there's a few people in the company, you know, who really have a really good grasp of not just their own domain, but you know, what we're trying to do on creative, what we're trying to do on science, what we're trying to do on engineering, and allowing us to sort of to build those approaches to, in this case, the narrative. But you know, it holds across different areas of the company. You know, we can make sensible steps forward because people are connecting the dots across the board. So I think you know, obviously you could sort of speak forever on culture, but that was one thing that definitely chimed with what you were saying, Moira.
That's great. Connecting the dots around the world, connecting all these things, seeing the system, definitely an important part of your culture. The next piece, I've got a quote for you that has been bouncing around my head this last week. Seen it a long time ago, but I wanted to find out who actually said it. The future is already here. It's just not very widely distributed yet. You've heard of it. It's actually William Gibson originally said this on NPR. It was around sci-fi and science fiction and science and science fiction, which is definitely part of our conversation today. But what I like about that is that we're having conversations about people now discovering that there are things like this going on, and being able to realize that there's stuff out there, you just haven't seen it yet. But so food is a challenging space to be in, each of you. It's life and death in a lot of cases, but you don't have a doctor title in front of your name, and you have to design good systems for people to survive and thrive, right? So what excites you about being in food, each of you, and what's going on in food? Moira?
Oh, I think it's fascinating because well, first of all, it's, you know, it's just essential at the basic level. But I think the experience of food, experience of product, ingredients, is such a personal thing. Ultimately, obviously, we ingest food, but you know, just from the packaging, you take the, you know, you cut close to your lips, in your hands, and so on. So it's a very personal relationship, I think, that people have with food. And it's been optimized in this world now we've created this disposable throwaway culture, which is, you know, when you think about all of these innovations at the time, even an individual single serve beverage, right, that you can have on the go, or meals that you can purchase and take away or eat in your car on the way. All of these innovations at the time, you know, the human nature, we everything to the max. So now we're experiencing the consequence. But this lifestyle where we have the freedom to consume and so on without to more recently much thought about the effect of the, you know, the wrapper, the discarded this and so on. We can just enjoy and move on. and we, realize that we can't really live that way. There are consequences to that. So I think, the ability for both with the products themselves, the ingredients within the product, but also the delivery of those products and forms, is how do we help people change their behavior? And that's really what power is, right? It's the ability to influence, to affect the behavior of others to get the outcome that you desire. How do we do that between the scientists and the designers and manufacturers and so on, to allow people to move into this newer space, which we have to do, right? Because the consequences, we can't force them to change. We can put restrictions on things. We can say, okay, you have to pay for a bag and this and that has some impact. But I think the ability of design, I guess, in partnership with the science and so on of the new options, to be able to attract people to a new world, a kind of different beauty, and not beauty only in the aesthetic sense, but the beauty of a different kind of life that that is a shift from where we are today, without feeling the sacrifice of, how can we engineer that? How can we, help people make that shift to a newer way of living, eating, consuming, and so on. And I think it's just a fascinating, really important series that's going to involve everyone. But it's I think it's a really interesting thing, and understanding human nature. How do we help people make that transition? Recognize maybe the barriers. I think Tom's done a great job of making the science of his ingredient, as we talked about, very approachable and just acceptable. But there are some barriers, perhaps, and other things we've seen where there's a kind of, can I trust that? It was grown how? What did they make this? It's not a living thing. So that barrier, how can we ease people through and build trust in the new in a way that is going to help us? It's a really important part.
Yeah. Tom, it's not academia, so it's a lot more exciting than that. But what excites you about being in food?
That's not what the academics think. No, I've got a whole spiel that I could tell you on that story, but I won't do that one here. as a separate thing. I know, I appreciate you saying that. I certainly can't claim all the credit for the way the company communicates now. That's certainly can't claim all the credit for that, but I appreciate it's well received. What was the question? Why is the food such a great industry to work? Food industry such a great industry to work in? I think but back in the early days of the company, it really wasn't obvious that this company, in fact, this company wasn't doing anything in food when it was incorporated. So the whole background story to it was actually pivoted into doing what it's doing right now, or at least its first ingredient, about 6 months after I incorporated the company. So it really wasn't obvious. But speaking from this side of that story, from being in the space, I think that the nice thing is, from an impact standpoint, and let's say before the company was a food company, I didn't know it was food, but I did know I wanted to do something important, something that would matter, something that, if we didn't do it, someone else just wouldn't come along and do it. So something that really made a difference. And from that standpoint, the food industry is a great space to be in, because it touches so many things, all the things we've spoken about already. It's obviously, if you want to make impact on health and human well-being and longevity and all that, of course food plays a key role there. Climate sustainability, obvious major impact there. And then as I say, the third piece is sort of population health, feeding the world. Obviously, the food industry plays a major role there. So that's, from that side, it's a rewarding place to be if you're doing things that can move the needle on any of those pieces. And then, as Moira was saying, I suppose the other nice thing from a just visceral standpoint of working in the food industry is very personal. It's very we all eat and we all enjoy eating, and so and I mean, that's certainly one thing we've got used to running the company, is that it involves a lot of trying different products. It involves eating a lot of chocolate. So that's obviously like a nice thing as well. And I sound spurious saying that, but no, it's a genuine, joy to work on things when you can enjoy eating a product and you can also envisage a big impact from it.
You could have just done that. It's like, I just love eating a lot of chocolate. That's why I'm here. Okay, you haven't gotten off the hook from the last question, but I do want to take any questions from the audience before I ask this one. If we have any questions from the audience. Kiona's
We have
gonna...
a few questions
Ooh.
from the audience online.
From the digital universe?
We do. The first question is from Kimberly, and then we have one from Nick. I'm going to combine those two questions. They're wondering where the greatest impact happens, either at small companies or large companies, and if there's a reason you've consciously chosen to move on from working at larger companies.
Do you both get those? More impact on a large company, from a large company, or in a big or a small company, and why you both moved on from large to small? Moira, you want to take that really unfriendly question? But good.
I think it's friendly. Yeah. I think so when you're in, well, I think making an impact happens initially in a small circumstance, right? Maybe it's with a conversation with one colleague that starts to open their mind, right? And then starts to build a bit of momentum and gravitational pull. So I think large or small, I think it's because, design, it's such a human activity. It's by people, done by people, with people, for people. And so the human part of that is so critical. And whether you're large or small, I think it's making some connections where we can share this different experiences of the world and thinking and so on and observations and really kind of create that has ripple effects, and it can have ripple effects both in large and small. The large companies, sometimes depending on who you can kind of make those connections with at a level, it can have a larger effect, the haloing out over a larger audience. But ultimately too, I think, because it depends on individual, you can have someone, the head of the company, saying, yes, we're committed to design. Design is part of our business. But when you're down at a meeting with someone who it's their brand, it's their thing, and they're not quite sure what working with you is really going to mean, what does this design thing really mean? And so again, you're working on a human way to kind of attract them and to kind of overcome some of the differences in this kind of alien approach at times. So I think they're both. And then as far as moving on, I mean, I was called to the next company. I think what I feel very good about is I was 3, 4, 5 years or so plus at each of these experiences, and you fall in love. You fall in love with each brand, and it's very immersive, and they're very powerful relationships. And then, but to build an infrastructure to make an impact, for me in my role, I see in kind of my effectiveness, it's not about me per se necessarily. I've been an instigator, a kind of catalyst, someone that's enabled change and progress to make. So when I have left and moved on because someone else called me at an appropriate time, I feel very good. I didn't abandon the other part of the harvest. I left something in place that actually could grow and prosper and grow. So I didn't seek other opportunities. I was called and invited, and I said yes, and so that's.
How about you, Tom? Perspective on that?
So I mean, I can't really give too much perspective on the big versus the small from the inside, because I've never really, well, I suppose the university was a big entity, but it's not really a normal organization. So working in the labs there, so yeah, I can't really speak to the big versus large. I mean, I guess which has the most impact, I think, was part of the question, wasn't it? I mean, I say, I mean, from our perspective, we move very fast, and so we're able to do things that could have impact, and we're able to build approaches to do things which could have impact, but ultimately they won't have impact unless we're ultimately someday are a big company, because we do need to be big enough to be able to do that. So I suppose there's two sides to the argument. It's easier to get stuff started when you're small, but if you really want to make an impact, the company has to at some point get big.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good way to put it. Any other questions before I answer my really not fun questions? Yes. Thank you. So he's talking about using more of the plant. So for example, like if you're using a soybean plant, typically the plant grows and it grows all summer, and then when it's time to harvest, the plant's pretty much dead. So when are you harvesting the stem to get the fiber? Same with wheat. You know, the wheat dies, and one of the things I think is a big problem that people don't talk about, especially corporate farming, is farmers don't want to wait for the wheat to naturally die to harvest it, so they fly over it and spray Roundup on it. And I think that's more of a gluten problem than actually gluten is a problem. I think it's a Roundup problem. But so where are you getting the fiber, and when are you harvesting that?
That's a quick technical question. Yeah, so I'd say, I mean, there's sort of many ways to answer it, because there's many sources of these things. But as I say, there's more of this stuff on the planet than all of the actual food that people consume. So there's about twice as much of all these side streams as there is all of the grain and seeds and beans and et cetera, et cetera. So there's really is huge amounts of it. And where you get it from, varies a lot depending on the material. So oat hulls, is that we tend not to go to the farm right now. Right, at some point in the future, we probably, when we've exhausted all other resources, go straight to the farm. But right now, we get corn cobs from canning facilities. We get oat hulls from sort of oat processing facilities, like porridge facilities or oat milk producing facilities. So those things are collected there. So that's hopefully partly answers that. But and we don't really work with anything with soybean. We tend to work with major what botanists would call grasses. So rice, wheat, barley, oats, even sugarcane stalks, actually, although we don't do too much with that. And so how they collect, well, I mean, I guess the crop is sort of, plant has died by the end of it when it's harvested, of course, but there's just lots of this stuff left remaining. Does that answer the question?
That's great. We've got another question, which...
Hi, kind of follow up to that, Tom. I think what you're talking about, we call here in Minnesota upcycling foods. And my favorite example is spent grains from the brewing process. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, at least Americans are kind of hard to change, especially their eating habits. If it doesn't have a ton of sugar in it or alcohol, it's not high on the list. But spent grains gets broken down into a high protein, high fiber, low sugar flour, and people like their bread and their baked goods. So I guess my big question is how do we get people in general to modify or be okay with considering alternative foods? One of my favorite ones that I personally like is cricket. I worked with a cricket entrepreneur. The rest of the world eats insects, but most Americans, you mention it, and they scrunch up their noses and get a very confused look on their face, and then they say, "You mean the bug?" And yes, high fiber, high protein, high calcium, easy to digest protein because it has all the amino acids, good all the way around, except it's a bug. So it's just this getting people to change, and maybe it's a marketing problem, I'm not sure, but I think we have to change that or figure out a way to hide it some way, like spent grains in bread, or we're going to run into problems really quickly with the food supply to feed 10 billion people.
What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think I mean I think we probably don't have as as tough a problem convincing people as with crickets probably. I think, but I think by and large, there's certainly a communication is an important part of what we do, and but normally we view it as an asset. We don't shy away from how we make the ingredient. Actually, it's quite reassuring to most that it's entirely a plant fiber derived material. It's come straight from the crops that you would use elsewhere. There's nothing unusual in that respect. It's come from a part of the crop you wouldn't normally eat, but it's still the same plant. And of course the other side of the story is making products that are better and yet still taste good. So the quick way of describing the sugar ingredient that we make is we take the corn cob, we break it down with enzymes. That's the process we use, and what comes out the other end are sugars that derive from the fiber, and then because they are plant sugars, they behave like cane sugars in food products. So your products look and feel like they're supposed to, but because those sugars are derived from fiber, your body still recognizes them as fiber. So it's low calorie like fiber, low glycemic like fiber, prebiotic like fiber. And so normally that actually forms a core part of how we describe the benefits of the ingredients. So we're certainly not trying to hide it. And usually it's helpful when that gets across. It's not something we have to explain why that should be good.
That's why I think, Tom, that your partnership with Thomas Keller is so brilliant, because it's influence based on trust. So here's one of the chefs that's the most discerning regarding ingredients, right? And is known for that. And so for him to trust your ingredient to enough for it in and of itself, the soft power of that is an established kind of value that people really helps move people in that process. So I think, it's really lovely that you've done that. And I think it speaks a lot to the value. So people kind of could skip over some of the other kind of gaps in their thinking, their linear thinking, to get to a kind of sense of, oh yeah, this could be good. So
love that. Very good point. And of course, put it in chocolate. Not bad. Totally different problem than crickets, though. I've consumed those and chocolate covered crickets. I've done that. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, you have thoroughly entertained and informed our audience, and not a waste of an hour. It was an amazing hour. Thank you for doing this, Tom and Moira. Thank you, everyone, for showing up here and in the digital world. Hopefully enjoyed it. I love that we had questions from Kiona through our digital community. That was great. Keep up the great work, Tom and Moira. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, we have 2 more months already scheduled. We have Eric the Bike Man and QBP on the stage next month, and then 2 other amazing guests the month after. Again, this is us, Think Alike. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.